Wonderful. Thank you, Zen, and thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. My name is Rune Hauge, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Mentorcam. We are a platform that lets startup founders get access to mentors, other founders, VCs, and operators for one-on-one advice and guidance. Now, since we're talking about fundraising, we're backed by General Catalyst and also did Y Combinator about, when was it, a year and a half ago now. And today we actually have one of our most popular mentors with us, Edvard Engeseath. Eddie is the founder of the telehealth startup Nurx. They started the company back in 2015 to make birth control and HIV prevention more easily accessible. Did Y Combinator in 2016 and then went on to raise more than $100 million from investors like Unisquare Ventures and Kleiner Perkins. And earlier this year merged with another telehealth startup, 30 Madison, to become one of the biggest telehealth companies in the world with more than 700 employees. So Eddie, it's great to have you here. And since we're talking about fundraising, I'd love to just dive into your experience going from being a family physician, Eddie's a medical doctor, gave up a safe and secure career, to becoming an immigrant founder in San Francisco, trying to raise capital with not so much more than a vision and a PowerPoint deck. What was that experience like, Eddie?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for the introduction. And I just want to say it's so exciting to be here, surrounded by new startup founders. I have been on that journey with the sleepless nights, forgetting about breakfast, lunch, and dinner, working nonstop. So I know what you all are going through. I've been on that journey, and I'm so excited to be here and to be able to share some of my learnings, experiences, and insights that are hopefully going to help you in your own journey. So with that, huge thanks to Mentorcam and Sunstone team, Zen and Jennifer. Thank you so much for having me. So yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit about the early days. So like Rune mentioned, my background is in healthcare. I'm a physician by training. And when I was in medical school, I sort of felt a little bit out of place. I knew that I wanted to do something in healthcare, but I didn't want to work in clinical practice. And so I just jumped at the first opportunity to start my own company. When I was done with my medical degree, and I'm half Greek, half Norwegian. So I was born in Greece, but I grew up in Norway, which is where I've completed my degree. I bounced around with a couple different ideas. How could I do something in healthcare? And what often came up is women needed access to birth control. And if you look at the statistics on a global level, more than 100 countries worldwide have access to birth control without needing a prescription. And when we look at the United States, there's 3 million unintended pregnancies every year, which was just mind-blowing. And that laid the foundation for wanting to start on this journey. But as you correctly say, Rune, it wasn't, when you see this from the outside, it looks like this was super easy and everything looks like rainbows, but I can assure you that was not the case.
Wait, it wasn't a smooth curve? It wasn't just upwards, up and to the right the whole time? You didn't just parachute into Sand Hill Road and knock down those doors at the VC firms and collect checks?
No parachuting into Sand Hill Road and no immediate term sheets, absolutely not. So it was actually, we started this as a project, and we worked on this out of my co-founder's kitchen in San Francisco. Such a Silicon Valley cliche, but that literally was our office for almost 2 years. And we tried to raise money, and it was really, really difficult. And I can tell you guys, I have done everything. I've sent hundreds, if not thousands, of cold emails to people. We went on all kinds of pitching events. We tried to connect with people and get them to invest. We went to conferences, we got booths at various events, and we had very little success. But we were just in something I'm sure you all have heard this before, cockroach mode, where we're basically using no money and just using our own funds and trying to get in that first check. But nobody wanted to take a chance on us. So we ended up going to the place where it was the easiest to get money, which I'm sure some of you can guess. Friends and family. So we had friends and family that wrote us the first check, and then we were off to the races. So that's how we got our first money in the bank.
Okay. So you raised some money from friends and family. You were living in San Francisco. You were in cockroach mode, and you know that. Then what? What happened next?
So what we ended up doing is we had a grand idea, and we started pitching or started applying to incubators, and we decided we'll apply to YC. And so again, no glamorous story here, but we ended up pitching YC and applying to YC 3 times. Twice we didn't get accepted, and the third time, I will tell you, don't share this we don't share this to everyone, but we actually ended up applying for the 3rd time to Y Combinator, and we got accepted. And I will tell you that had we not got accepted that time, I'm not sure this company would be here today. And so that was a tremendous experience for us. And it really goes back to one thing that I tell all the founders that I talk to. The most important thing that you have in this game is power of perseverance. Don't give up. And especially when it comes to fundraising, try to take your ego out of the picture. Don't make it personal. It's all about top of funnel. It's all about talking to the right people and getting them to invest. And if you don't take those rejections personally, it's going to be a much easier process for you. And so the way it worked for us is when we got into YC, we kind of got that stamp of approval. I remember Sam Altman, who was one of our group leaders, he told us, you guys got to launch this as quickly as possible. We launched it, and we had a ton of press out the door. I think MTV Mom picked it up first of all things, and they wrote about us, and it just completely blew up. So we had a lot of investors then that were contacting us that wanted to invest. Long story short, we managed that process, and we ended up getting introduced to Union Square Ventures, which is one of the best venture firms out there. We love working with them, and they ended up giving us the first venture check, which was for our A round. So we basically went from just a small friends and family straight to our A, and we ended up, our goal was literally to raise a couple $1 million. 1 or 2 or 3, we would have been okay. But we ended up getting a term sheet for 4. We raised 5.3, and the round was so heavily oversubscribed that we actually had $12.5 million offered, but we decided to not take everything.
So wait a minute. You had $12.5 million just there, ready for grabbing from investors. Why didn't you just take it all?
It is a great question, Rune. And you know, really important, and here's a metric that I want you all to remember. You do not want to sell more than 40% of your company before you do a Series A. Because the most important thing here is that the investors, they want to see that the founders have skin in the game, and you're going to hire people, you're going to have an option pool, and you need to set yourself up for future funding rounds as well. And so what I like to say is, for the angel, before Series A, under no circumstances more than 40%. Typically, what I see and what I like is 15 for like a pre-seed, and then maybe 20 for a seed, but that's tops. So we simply didn't want to sell more of our company, and we also didn't feel like we needed all that capital to get us to the next level.
So don't take more money than you need, basically. That was the mindset that you had at the time.
Yeah, don't sell too much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you had no investor interest. No one wanted to invest at first, and then all of a sudden you got all this investor interest. You know, in that experience, did that teach you something about what investors really are looking for? Because sometimes I feel like they say one thing and maybe they do something else. And what are investors really looking for?
I think it's a really good question, Rune. And so we'll talk a little bit about how to position this, because I think there are some interesting elements in there, like FOMO, fear of missing out, also how you go about getting introductions and how you get in front of investors. But I will say that based on my own experience, and I've done about 50 angel investments, and I do a lot of advising, which is also one of the reasons why I love the Mentorcam platform, because it's a great way to give back, is that it's all about the founders. And that's like the number one thing, especially early stage. If you have a product launched, then people are automatically going to look at all those metrics, which I'm sure you all are very familiar with, CAC, LTV, growth rate, revenue, etc. But the most important thing is sort of the founders. And I want to break that down for you all to help you understand what I mean by that. So there's a couple things. Number one, are the founders obsessed by the product? Is there some kind of unique competitive advantage? And so in our case, for instance, our founding team was me, I'm a physician, my co-founder is an attorney, and healthcare is highly regulated, and there was something that opened up for us to be able to do this type or practice healthcare in a different way, which made the expertise that the founding team had be really a good one, a strong one. Are the founders good at communicating? Throughout the entire company, whether it's employees, whether it's investors, whether it's customers, you need to be a really good communicator. What is a good communicator? You should be able to, and I massively fumbled on this. I want to tell you a funny story about it. You want to be able to tell what you're doing really simply. So you should be able to explain what your company does in 2 sentences. Within the first 60 seconds of a pitch, they should know clearly what it is that you are doing. And I want to tell you a funny story here. So we applied to YC. We did really well. We got the blah blah blah. We managed to raise a bunch, and then I got invited to this dinner with a small group of people, and it was the first time I met PG, which is basically like one of the top people in YC, and he was like
the founder, Paul Graham, the founder of YC.
Yeah, I was really starstruck. So he comes up to me, and I had never met him before, and he goes, "So, what do you do?" And I was like, "Oh my God, this is like the number one question that I got in the interview," and it went really well. But I was so nervous, and I was like, I didn't want it to come off as something simple. I wanted to orchestrate. I wanted to show him how we're going to like revolutionize healthcare. And I started talking about all these intricate terms. And he's like, "Whoa, what are you talking about? I don't even understand what you're saying." If you would have pitched that in the interview, you wouldn't have gotten in. And I was like, wow, it's so true. And that was a great lesson for me. And something that I just want to share with you all, that just keep it simple. And when people get interested, then you can explain more. One more thing, Rune. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Go for it.
Yeah, I was just going to say the other thing I would say is the personal leader. Do they have sort of this magnetic force that attracts people around them? I think that's also something which some people have. And then you need to be decisive. Your startup will live or die by your decisions. I'm a firm believer in that you don't always have to make the right decisions. Quite frankly, it's impossible to make the right decision always, but indecision is the worst. And so just go in there, be confident, be a clear communicator about what it is you're doing and what you're trying to achieve, and show how much you know about what it is that you're being involved in. And I think you're set up for success.
I think that's a great story, Eddie, on how you very often want to keep the message extremely clear. And I see that a lot as well with founders that I mentor and work with. They have these very intricate PowerPoint decks. They're very lengthy. They talk a lot about the product, but the investors don't really care about all of that. They care about you as a founder. Are you capable? Are you a person that can power through walls, especially early on? And the more clear you make the vision and the path to realize that vision, the better. That's, at least in my experience, the deck that we used when we raised our first $1.5 million pre-seed, and then later on we ended up raising $4 million in seed money, had 5 slides on it. So I definitely subscribe to that philosophy, Eddie. So thank you for sharing that with us. I'd like to hone in a little bit on investor outreach specifically, because it's one thing when you're going through an accelerator like Y Combinator, like both you and I have done, but we've also raced outside of that. And in those cases, there's no demo day or no event that's happening. You have to actually get in front of investors and work on that yourself. So can we maybe talk about the best way to build investor relationships, get top of funnel, get those introductions?
Absolutely.
How do you even go about doing that? Because if you haven't done it, it's difficult.
Well, this was a long, painful journey for us, and so I'm happy to share what worked for us, and hopefully some of you can save a few years of your lives and for your startups. But basically, the number one learning I had is that cold emails, nobody invested in our company from a cold email. And that could very well be the case that some people are able to do that, but it never worked for us. Number one, you want to get introductions, and the level of introduction also matters. So the absolute number one place for an introduction is from a good, reputable investor that has invested in your company. When that happens, you literally call up that person and you just go, who do you think I should talk to? Do you have some other investors that you would recommend? Those are like the top ones. Now, if you don't have that, another great place to go is getting an introduction from a founder that investor has funded. And a way you could go about doing that, for instance, is check out the space that you're in, go on Crunchbase, look at similar companies, maybe ones that aren't directly competing, but that are in the same space. Look at what investors they have, look at the partners that joined the board, who wrote angel checks, who wrote seed checks. Make a list of those people and then network your way to them, either A, by talking to the founder and getting them to introduce you. And here's the thing, even if you don't know that founder, you could very easily email them, and I'll tell you how to draft this email or what's worked for us. And you basically say, hey, from founder to founder, this is what I'm building. What do you think? Blah, blah, blah. And the beautiful thing that I learned about, especially Silicon Valley, but in the United States in general, coming from Europe, is that people really want to pay it forward here. And when you've reached some kind of success, you always want to help other people. And all founders can very much know the journey of a founder and how challenging it is and how often it doesn't really necessarily get you to where you want to get. So there's a lot of compassion and there's a lot of help. So just feel free to ask people and they will help you. And so what I have done is reach out to founders and ask them, hey, what do you think about what I'm building? And then you get some feedback on what you're building. They have some buy-in, and then you ask them, by the way, I'm going to raise a round in 2 months. Do you have anybody you think I should talk to? I see that such and such invested in your company. What do you think about that investor? Are they good? Would you mind introducing me? And then suddenly you have a really good intro. So that's really important. And then I would also say, when you're going through this process, one of the key things I think founders mess up is get a proper CRM system and track leads aggressively. Build a top of funnel, look at similar but not competing companies, talk to the founders, pay it forward, abundance mindset.
What other tools do you recommend? I mean, we've used Crunchbase a lot when trying to find these companies that are somewhat similar but not competitors, and then look up their investors and then try to find out who the partner is, if it's a VC, and then look for founders that can introduce us.
Yeah, well, I think AngelList is another one that comes to mind. PitchBook, I think, also lists some of that information. But yeah, those are all good options. And then you can always look at look on Twitter, find sort of active angel investors that are out there talking about what you're doing. Get the name, add it to your list, find out how you're going to network your way to them. Don't just email them out of the blue. And then I'd love to maybe talk a little bit about the email, if we have time for that, Rune.
Let's do that. Let's definitely talk about the email, because I think that's part art, part science. It's really important to kind of nail that down. It's one of the things that I very often work with early stage founders on, first time founders racing. It's just getting that email right and getting those nuances almost perfect, and then creating a machine so you get a lot of it. So yeah, please, Eddie, share a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So here it goes back to what I said earlier. It's all about simplifying. And what you want to do here, I kind of see it as a little bit as a TV ad. You just want to give people a taste. You don't want to answer all the questions, and then you want to see who's interested, and whoever is interested is going to lean in. So that's sort of the key that you want to get to here. So it needs to be short. In less than 60 seconds, people are just going to like delete emails, and I'm sure investors get copious amounts of pitches in their emails. So explain what you're doing in less than 60 seconds. And in those 60 seconds, you want them to read and understand what you're working on. You don't need to explain anything. You just want them to understand what you're doing. And if it's relevant to them, then they will follow up and ask you more questions. I would say you need to include the problem, your solution, whether or not you've launched. If you've launched, then you need to say something about growth. How big is the opportunity? Do you have co-founders? Can any of them write code? That's one of the key things that they sort of wanted to know in YC. And does the founding team have some sort of insight here, as I mentioned earlier? And all this can be done super easy with a few simple sentences. Deck is not necessary. If you have one of those like clever email tracking tools where you can see people's open rate, sure, go for it. It doesn't hurt, not necessary. The goal is to get a conversation. The goal is not to get anybody to understand necessarily what you're doing from a highly intricate level. You just want to get a conversation going from people that are interested in that space.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And there's a sequence of emails here as well, right? Because you want to first, if I'm getting what you're saying correctly, first is you can get introductions from strangers, right? But you got to build a little bit of rapport. So you got to get that initial request for feedback right. Get on a call with a founder that can introduce you to the investor. And then when you have a little bit of a rapport, you ask for the introduction. And this is the email that's really key to nail, if I'm getting you correctly. And it's been in my experience that as well, where you write a forwardable blurb that's specific to that investor and you send it to the founder that introduces you so they can just quickly forward it. And that email has to be really good.
Exactly. Short, concise, straight to the point. And I mean, you've had great success with this, Rune. So yeah, that is exactly how I would do it.
I got help from the best. So Eddie and I actually worked on this together when we were first racing our pre-seed round. So you very often only just need one investor that's really good, and the dominoes will start to fall. So yes. In our case, I haven't shared this, I guess, but Eddie is actually one of the first investors in Mentorcam. So I got an introduction from Eddie to another investor, who then introduced me to another person who introduced us to General Catalyst. And then they invested after 4 or 5 attempts at getting their attention. So I think perseverance here is key, and understanding that even if you get 100 no's, you just need that one yes.
Yes.
And it's a numbers game. It's totally a numbers game.
It's a numbers game, 100%. And every no is closer to a yes. So don't get discouraged. Try to take your ego out of it and don't take it personal when people say no. As a matter of fact, I remember in the early days of the company, I would take it so personally. Now, the investors that say no, in my book, are the good investors, because most investors won't say no. Most investors will just like say later, we need to see this, we'll think about it. They want to leave the option there to invest in the future if something happens, or if you get a really reputable investor to write the first check. So the investors who actually say no are the good ones, because those guys have done the work and they're not going to waste any more of your time.
So maybe it's really a no. You shouldn't just linger on the maybes. Is that correct?
I would say so. Yeah. I have never, I wouldn't recommend try to get a maybe to a yes unless you're really desperate and it's early on, but that is like, takes a lot of work. I would just add more top of funnel and try to find new good people that come recommended.
And you get better with the no's too, I think. Once you get a certain number of no's, you start thinking about, okay, what can I tweak? How can I get better? And you continually improve. And but it's also a little dangerous, because eventually you'll get a yes and you'll get good at it, and you'll get another yes, and we get more yeses, and you get really good, and you start building all this FOMO amongst the investors, and it gets exciting. But that can be a little dangerous too, right? Just
I think that's
falling in love with fundraising.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point you bring up there, Rune. And it's about, I mean, some companies, some founders are really good at fundraising. And if you're really good at fundraising, you can sort of do it quick and easy. If not, you'll not have to let the numbers talk to you. But Rune, to your point, you don't build amazing companies from being really good at fundraising. You build amazing companies from being good at building amazing companies. And so what you want to do is raise and get back to work. You want to spend as little time as possible on it and get back to building. And so founders who fall in love with fundraising and do it, spend a lot of time doing that, that can certainly be a pretty big time suck, and I think is not ideal.
So do your researching and get in there and get it done quickly when you can. But you have to build that FOMO. Can we maybe also talk a little bit about building FOMO? This is something virtually every founder hears about, and it's not always that straightforward on how to get this right. And you're one of the people that I know, if not the person that I know, that is really, really good at building FOMO. So maybe you can share that with everyone here as well. Okay,
so I would say that there's no like easy answer. You need to basically, there's a couple tools that you can use, and they're all different based on who you're interacting with. But the idea here is that when you get a good check from a good VC, then everybody wants to invest. And so there's a couple things that you can do to sort of build scarcity around something that isn't necessarily a scarcity. So for instance, if your goal is to raise 500,000, it's better to say initially that you're trying to raise 250,000. And then when you get 150, you're more than half done. And then when you get to 250, you're oversubscribed. So at that point, the ball is already rolling. You've got momentum. People are talking about you. And then it's easier to close additional checks. So that's one way. Another thing could be, you could time box it. So you could say, for instance, you could line everyone up. You're raising over like 2 weeks. You're going to be done by that day. And then you have you have the funnel, you have the people that are sort of candidates, and you keep them updated on when you receive checks from others, blah, 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 and you keep the ball moving forward. I will say, though, that it's really important here to just be honest and upfront and truthful about what you're building. You should never try to sort of, I don't know, take it to the next level or exaggerate.
Don't deceive investors.
Yeah, you don't want to, you never want to do any of that, but there's like an art, a fine balance you can play here to keep people sort of on the ball and interested and motivated. And then I could share one quick story here of how we did a bridge round. And so we were in a position basically where it would be a good idea for us to raise, and this was between 2 rounds. We didn't exactly have those metrics that we really needed to have to do like a full-on round. So what we did is we called up one of my investors, which is like one of our top people, and they agreed to sort of put in a significant amount. And then we had that amount, And then we capped it at an amount which was a little bit less than the total amount that we were planning to build. And then we had a list of already existing investors that we started calling. And then we would basically call down a list. And the first person we would call would be, hey, we are planning to take advantage of an amazing opportunity in the market right now. We want to raise maximum 2 million. We already have 1 million committed. This is going to like close up pretty fast. If this is something that would be interesting to you to invest in, how much do you think you would take? So you're already getting their mindset into thinking about how it would be to put that, to give you that amount. It's basically like sales a little bit. And then you would get, maybe you don't get a yes or a no on the phone, but you get an interest. So they could maybe then say, we would be interested in investing 200 or 300 if we participated. Cool. Now the next person you call, what you would then be able to say is, we already have 1 million committed. We have interest for another 300, and it's going to close up soon. And then you build on that momentum as you work your way down the list. And in this way, we raised, I think, 2-3 million within less than a week with just a couple of phone calls.
Wow, that's amazing. That's also you know, how you really get that FOMO going, right? You get all that interest, and you use that as leverage. But how do you, you know, especially in the early days, this is sometimes a little confusing, going from verbal confirmation to actually getting the money in the bank.
Yeah, this is like a top question. I've seen a lot of founders mess this up, and I cannot tell you how important this is. If someone verbally commits that they want to do a deal, get it in writing immediately. Just follow up. Literally, this is what we did. We had a meeting, we had a coffee. Okay, I'm in for 500. Awesome. Okay, get in the car, email the guy, confirming you're in for 500. We'll send you docs shortly. Just so you make sure to hold them to their word with something in writing. And then just send them documents immediately. Get it signed instantly. There's nothing good that will come out of waiting. And as a matter of fact, you will only show hesitation and open up more questions if you don't do that. So just show that you're on the ball, as we say in Norway. How can I say that? Rune, what's the right term for that?
I don't know if there's an English translation of that, but you definitely want to be like on it, right?
You want to be on it.
When it happens, boom. Thank you for the confirmation. Excited to have you on board. Sending work your way via DocuSign, Clerk, or whatever you use.
And it's so easy. To your point, Rune, there's tools out there, standardized documents. You put in the cap, the rest the investor can fill out. Super easy. Just get it done, get it signed, and move on. Yeah,
well, that's a good point. So you don't. What about negotiating terms and stuff like that? I mean, getting it done and moving on sometimes seems a little contradictory with, well, I want this valuation cap now because I don't want to get diluted, and the investors saying something else, especially if it's the first investor. Like, what are your thoughts on that and getting the right terms? How important is that?
It's a good question. So the caveat here is you want to make sure that you follow the don't sell more than 40% before your A, and 15 and 20-25 is sort of good for pre-seed seed. But other than that, if you get a yes from a good investor, I would spend so much time trying to get the high valuation, and it becomes like a full-on ego thing, and you want to compare yourself to other companies, and you want to raise bigger rounds at higher valuations. That is just going to get back and bite you in the end of the day. You're going to have more growth you need to do to get to the next stage. So if you get a good deal from a good investor, just take it and be done with it, because the ultimate goal here is to do this quick and not spend a ton of time on it. And I
spend time building.
Spend time building. That's ultimately what's gonna lead to your success, not how good you are at fundraising.
Yeah, Well, that's I think something that's important to remember, especially if you get momentum, right? It's really tempting to just get into it and try to negotiate and get the best terms. I do sometimes think I have one more question before maybe opening it up, but I do think that, you know, you on that note, maybe more important than getting the best terms is getting investors that are really subscribe to the mission of your company long term, and you know, having that sort of value add, as people call it. It's tempting to grab the first check that's coming your way, but there's a lot of talk about value add investors. So what should people look for? What is a value add investor?
It's a great question. So I would see that, look, if everything goes perfect in your startup and you have good growth, good metrics, excellent trajectory, doing the funding rounds are like clockwork, then it doesn't really matter who's giving you the check. However, that will not happen in most cases, and there's so many ups and downs. Even like the most successful companies can tell you about how challenging it's been at times. And I will say having the right people around the table is absolutely instrumental. So that is the number one thing I solve for. And a way that you could try to evaluate that is figuring out, why are these investors investing? Is it purely to make money, or is it because this is something that maybe is near and dear to their heart? For us, it was sort of democratizing healthcare and increasing access to important health to people who have been left out of the healthcare system. And we had investors who were deeply passionate about that. And we built strong relationships with those investors. Many of those investors are good friends today. We have been in tough situations. We have been in situations where we had to call them up and we needed to get them to invest, because if we had gone out in the market, we would have gotten like bad terms. And they were there for us. And they were in this for the long run. They were in it for us to achieve our vision, and saw that as sort of a long process and not something that they wanted to do quick and easy. So I think that's really important. And then, of course, look, when it's really early, if you can get friends and family to give you some money just so that you're like up and running, I think that's totally fine. I think before Series A, it's also good to get some professional investors in there that can help make introductions to a Series A investor. I think that would be really good for you all to do.
So that introduction, or those introductions, that's maybe something to look at when we're looking for an institutional investor. No, that was really great. Thank you so much, Eddie. We did say we were going to leave some time for Q&A, and we got some questions in here. So let's segue into that. I have one question here from Yi. For early stage startups, it is difficult to build a reliable financial forecast 5 years into the future. Can you tell us, how did you present your sales forecast for your A round?
For the A round? Okay, correct. Well, yeah, because early on, I think it completely depends on sort of, it completely depends on what business you're in, of course, but early on before the A, I would say the most important thing is to rely on founders, their expertise, because professional investors know that you can build like an immaculate, extensive, comprehensive financial model, but it is in 99% of the cases not going to be like that. And good professional investors know that. And so for the A, I would just use my best evaluation of what are the goals I want to get to for the next funding round. How does that line up with burn and how much I need to invest, and sort of build the model out as best as I can. But I think so much more important is the team, and do you really have product market fit? What are some early looks at CAC LTV, those types of things.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. and it's investors also know that there's going to be uncertainty. Like 5 years is a long time into the future for a startup. So I think making that believable, if I may add something, is really, really key. We're getting a few more questions in here. I wonder, I'm going to ask Jake, who's putting the webinar together here. Can we Zoom people in, and then we can ask the questions live? Yeah. Tom, George has a question here, a couple of questions. So Tom, if you don't mind, I'll let you ask the questions live here.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much. My company is part of the Long Beach Accelerator Cohort 5 that is currently going. And so
awesome. What do you do, Tom?
So I'm actually a NASA engineer who's morphed into a businessman. So this is all, I'm kind of drinking out of a fire hose. In a way, I empathize with you being a medical doctor trying to be an entrepreneur. And so thus far, I have not taken VC money because I've been primarily contract revenue funded. But in order to move to the next level, I would have to consider VC funding. And this environment that we are in currently with all the recession, people are pulling back on their investments, saving it for their existing investments, as well as the terms that they're offering you are kind of ridiculous. So how do you navigate that? And the second thing is the customer discovery process, because that is ultimately key to building your company. And how did you go about that?
Let's take that first company. The first question first was, how do you get the investment terms, or how do you get good investment terms in this climate?
Correct.
Look, I think it's a very challenging climate, and I can absolutely sympathize with that. One thing that I forgot to mention when we talked about what investors are looking for, this is like, I understand that not everybody can do this, but there's nothing that gets investors more excited than if you could go on without investing. Then the narrative completely changes. And the reason why I bring that up is, can you get your costs to such a controlled level that with your revenue, you can break even, or maybe you're even breaking even, or maybe you're profitable even with just a very small amount of revenue. If you're in that position, you have incredible leverage because you're in control of your own destiny. And then the story is, hey, listen, we are taking over the world here with our spaceships or whatever the pitch is. But we actually don't need money. We just want to find good value add investors. And if we had money, it would allow us to scale faster. This is a golden opportunity, and it would be a shame if we didn't do it. But to be clear, we don't need to raise money now. So we're only going to do this if it makes sense. And then you've completely shifted that dynamic. Now, I do think the valuations for sure are coming down, but I also think the valuations were in a pretty unhealthy place some time ago. So I think that's ultimately a good thing. But it's that's sort of a balancing act that I would do there. And then I would try to, the way we also navigated that in the beginning is, if someone asks you how much are you raising, I wouldn't necessarily answer that question, because you can be flexible. We could raise a little bit and we can work with that. And if we had more, then that would unlock more growth potential. So you're not bucketing yourself in any situation. And if that good investor does come along that does really believe in you and really wants to write that big check, then you also have the opportunity to do that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Fantastic.
And the second part, the customer discovery.
So the customer discovery part, Tom, will definitely a great question too, but that's a little on the side of fundraising, or did you mean that in terms of traction and stuff like that when you raise?
Because yes, exactly, because of the credibility that you will have when you raise, if you have a good revenue pipeline and so on. I mean, as I mentioned, for me, I have had contract revenue, not sales revenue. And so that has been a downer when it comes to attracting investment.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Nurx, my company, is a direct-to-consumer business, so it's a little bit different. But I would say that try to have a good story for a good pipeline of how you're going to get clients and pitch that story in a strong way. And hopefully that gets you where you want to be.
We have a couple of more questions here. Just want to make sure we can get through them. So we have one from DW at Local Light, and then Sean Chenoweth had a question as well. So let's take DW first. Do you want to also just ask the question here live?
Sure, it sounds good. And so I'll just go ahead and read it because I took a little time to write it. But I'm DW Farrell with Localite, and we were in cohort 1, which we refer to as the greatest of all time because it was the only one at the time for the Long Beach Accelerator. And I'll just jump into it. So if you've raised $500,000 as safe notes, first money raised, and you then announce a $2 million seed priced round, does that 500K count as a fourth of what has been raised? Or to put it another way, that you count the safes that are going to convert to the shares in the total for the priced seed round? Or do you say that the initial 500K was pre-seed safes, but now we are raising an additional round, calling it a seed round, it's $1.5 million. Are you in?
Yeah. So look, it's a great question. I would say that what are you trying to optimize for? What are you trying to solve for? Is there like a total amount that you want to raise? If your total amount that you want to raise is 2.5, then, or to be clear, this outstanding safe or note that you have will get converted when you do the price round. So it will be part of that round, but you can use the narrative to your advantage. You could just be like, we're raising, let's say you want to get to 2.5. You go out, you say you pitch, we are hoping to raise 2 million. We already have 500 committed. And when you get to 2, you oversubscribe yourself for the additional 500, and that all becomes part of that round.
Okay, so it's up to us, and it's the narrative. I mean, part of it is, we want to be honest and clear, but also it helps if we're able to say, we're a fourth of the way there, right? So by saying the total is 2 million in this example, and we already have collected checks, money's in the bank for 500K, then we could say we're a quarter of the way. But if I treat it as 2 separate rounds, we did pre-seed 500K, now we're raising 1.5.
Yeah.
We're 0% of the way there. So I was thinking about it a little bit more as just how it was presented.
I can appreciate the question, and I thank you for the additional color. Look, the most important thing is you want to be impeccable with your word. So it depends on when you raise this money. Was it a couple months ago? Was it like a year and a half ago? Then maybe it's a little different. But ultimately, you want to pitch it in a good way that optimizes for your outcome without jeopardizing your integrity.
Got it. Okay.
That answers the question. Yeah.
I would like to add that this is going to be a little different if it's not a priced round. If you raised $500,000 on safes on some terms, and then you're doing another 1.5 on slightly different terms, this is also on safes. This is still seed money.
Yeah.
Right? You can kind of stack that, and similar to what Eddie was saying, you don't have to say straight off the bat that, this is going to be $2 million, right? You can start with, maybe we're adding another 500, I'm halfway there. Okay, we decided to add another million, and now we're also halfway there, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah. And the way that we're talking about it, and I think this lines up with what you said before. If you're going for 500K, just shoot for 250 first. So right now we are saying we want to double what we raised, right? So in this example, 500K raised already, we're going for $1 million, right? And that's a milestone for us. But ultimate goal is, in this scenario, 2 million. So as long as we're explicit about all that, hey, we're halfway to our milestone, which is, man, here's what we can do with that. It's an opportunity we got to take advantage of. But as you're saying, Rune, that it's all safe, so it's all going to end up being in that seed priced round.
Yeah. So if it's all safe, then I would certainly, unless there's a big time gap, more than a year, that's a decent amount of time, right? But if that's not the case, if it's not a massive time gap, and there's some circumstances, even still, I would frame it as one seed round.
Great. Thank you so much.
Well,
Absolutely.
yeah, absolutely. And then I think we have time maybe for a couple more questions here. I think Sean had a question. You raised your hand. I don't see it in the Q&A, but let's just go for it if you're there.
By the way, it'd be awesome to hear just your ultra brief. What do you do also when you introduce yourselves?
Yeah, please share what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. We are in the current cohort right now. My name is Sean Chenoweth, and yeah, one of the founders of Arcada, which is doing augmented reality knowledge management for facility maintenance and management and manufacturing teams. And my general question, Edvard, is like, we're not there yet, and I know that, but transitioning from kind of the cockroach mode to needing to pour fuel on the fire mode. And I'm just curious on, like, back when you were at that stage, where was that kind of turning point in your head where you're like, all right, we're ready to pour that fire and start this active fundraising process? And how much energy were you putting into, like, kind of beginning the initial bit of that process with maybe networking before you were, have even approached it? Because I'm just trying to balance, like, right now, it's like, when is the right time? We need to focus on obviously finding really the best place we should be at, and the vertical we need to be going after, and a repeatable sales model. And I don't see it's probably wise to be spending too much time trying to network to prepare for 6 months to 12 months from now when we do want to raise that. But also, I know that's one of the jobs of founders. And so from your perspective, back when you kind of were at that stage, where was that initial point from, like, cockroach mode to, all right, we're ready to pour some fuel on this fire?
It is a great question, and I love this question. So, I would say you want to have a good fundraising narrative. What are you trying to achieve? What is the goal here? What is your vision? And do you have the team in place? I think if you just have that, you actually have what you need in order to go and do an angel round or a pre-seed round. Now, I'll tell you how it was for us, what really was the unlock, because for us, it was highly technical, and it was there were a lot of legal challenges that we needed to overcome, that there were changes in the regulatory space that allowed some states to allow for what we're doing, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. So we always had to think about that. So this was a hobby project for a long time before we really put the stake in the ground and tried to actively go out and properly raise. I will share my number one learning, which I got from Sam over at YC and Jeff, is we were so afraid to launch. And that is the number one, I think one of the top reasons why I see founders fail is you end up sitting in your basement or sitting in your office and building something that you think the world wants, but you don't actually talk to your customers. The most important thing and the biggest unlock we could have had in the early days of our company would have been to launch sooner. As a matter of fact, we got into YC without a product, and they told us, you guys are totally insane. You need to launch this right now. And we're like, no, but it's not ready. It's going to break. And they're like, doesn't matter. Just launch it now. And when we did that, it was a very different story for us. We had product market fit out the door. And so it just completely took off. But it's so important getting something out there, getting feedback on it, iterating, and then you get a story, and then you have that story, you take that story, that becomes your fundraising narrative, and then you're off to the races. But this is going to look different based on what you're doing and who your customers are, if you're direct to consumer, B2B business. But yeah, those are some foods for thought and something that worked for us.
Yeah, thanks. That's helpful.
We're technically on time, but I saw Maliha here. I hope I'm not bastardizing her name. Had a really good question, so I want to make sure that you get to ask that question as well.
Is this Maliha from Dubai?
Hi, yes, it's Malia from
Awesome.
Dubai. It's about 11 p.m. my time, but
Oh, wow.
I
Thank
go
you
to
for
bed.
staying up.
Yeah, no, I wanted to stay up for this. It was a great session, so thank you guys for it. I'll just jump into my question really quick. Well, actually, first of all, I'm the founder of GiftPass, which was part of the LBA cohort 4. And we are on a mission to modernize the gift card industry for the mobile generation. My question is, I think we always ask, like, we envision, the investors we have are going to be perfect. And sometimes they're not. They're not the right fit. As you kind of go on the journey and you grow. So what should you do if you're no longer on good terms with one of your investors? For example, like, you have a friends and family round, and let's say your husband at that time invests, who, for example, is no longer your husband. What do you do? It's not my situation, but just wondering what you do.
This is such a good question, and thank you for asking it. So this has happened twice in our company. We had one person that invested and then ended up launching a competitive business. So what we did is we just removed them from the investor updates and just completely isolated them. We didn't give them any information as what was going on in the company. Without going into details, we did have an investor that also we had some challenges with. And what we ended up doing there is we just managed them until we did a really big and successful oversubscribed priced round. And then we bought them out. So they got a nice return. And then the new investors took their chunk, basically. So we managed to get them out of the company. So that's something that could work. I mean, everything has to align nicely in order for that to happen. I mean, you need to have a good step up. You need to have oversubscribed rounds, but that's a way that you could navigate that as well.
Great, thank you for that.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
I think it's unfortunately a more common situation than people might think. I think a lot of founders end up having an angel investor that maybe they shouldn't have taken money from and put on their cap table. So thank you for that, Eddie, and thank you. I think we're out of time now. We're over time actually, so that'll be the last question. I have one more question from Tom about email addresses for further contact and conversation. We'll circulate ways to get in touch with both myself and Eddie post this session. But I wanted to thank you so much for coming on, Eddie. And thank you, Sam and Jennifer, as well for hosting, and everyone who attended for attending. It's been great. We are going to do another session on product market fits that we're going to share some information about as well later this month. And hope to see you all there. We will you will hear from us soon as well. We're going to send out a survey, so if you can please take a few moments to respond to those survey questions, I'd appreciate it.
Can I just say a few words, Rune?
Go for it, buddy.
I just wanted to thank you all. And I have been in the trenches. I know how it is to be a startup founder. It's not easy, but there's lots of good mentors out there and there's lots of good resources. So don't be afraid to ask. Other founders have been in your shoes, and don't hesitate to reach out. It's such a pleasure and a privilege to be able to support you all on your journeys.